The wind cut through my coat like a blade the night they locked me out. I didn't have time to grab my gloves. Or my pride. 1 minute, I was standing in the kitchen handing my daughter-in-law a dish towel, and the next, I was staring at the front door slamming in my face, the deadbolt sliding home like a final sentence. Outside, the snow fell in thick, silent sheets, not a neighbour in sight. Not a single porch light left on. I pounded on the door at first, half out of shock, half out of stubbornness. But all I heard was the muffled laughter of my family settling in for a warm night. Without me. No explanations, no second chances, just cold. I stood there for what felt like forever, waiting for someone to realise their mistake. But no one did. That's when I felt it. The familiar weight in my coat pocket, a small, worn key, forgotten, except by me. They changed the locks on this house, but not on every door. There was another place they thought I'd forgotten, a place where I used to take them every summer before they stopped calling it home, the old cabin by Lake Willow, the one I paid for, renovated and protected long before they knew what a mortgage was. I turned away from the house that no longer welcomed me, snow crunching beneath my boots. No one watched me leave. Maybe they thought I'd go to a motel. Maybe they thought I'd beg them to open the door again tomorrow. They didn't know me at all. The cabin stood exactly where I left it years ago, surrounded by snow-dusted pines. Its dark wooden frame looked unchanged, like a memory preserved in frost. But something was wrong. Light spilled out from the living room window, soft, golden, and steady, as if someone had been waiting for me or hiding from me. I froze, heart caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. No one should have been here. The cabin wasn't rented. It wasn't listed on any vacation site. It was mine, quiet, forgotten, or so I thought. I stepped onto the porch, my boots creaking against the old wood. Near the welcome mat lay a pair of men's work boots, too new to be Dad's, too large to be mine. I tightened my grip on the key. They didn't just forget about this place. They took it too. I unlocked the door, slow and steady. The familiar scent of cedar and old books greeted me first, and then voices, faint but unmistakable. I edged closer to the living room and stopped just before the corner. There she was, my daughter, curled on the couch in front of the fireplace, laughing softly with her husband, comfortable, safe, like this was their home, like I had never existed. I stepped back, letting the reality hit me in the chest like a winter gust. They hadn't locked me out of their house because there was no room for me. They locked me out so they could take mine. And the worst part, they didn't even look surprised to be here. I left before they saw me. The night was too cold for another confrontation, and my heart wasn't ready for the answers I already knew. But tomorrow, I'd remind them who built this home and who still held the key. Morning came with the sharp bite of regret in the air. I returned to the cabin with a calm face and clenched fists. It wasn't about yelling. It was about reclaiming what was mine. With words, with history, with truth. I knocked. This time, no more keys, no more silence. My daughter opened the door in a robe, coffee mug in hand, and froze. She blinked once, then smiled. Not warm, not guilty, just practiced. "Mom," she said, as if we were catching up at brunch, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine not," I said. "I'd like to come in." A pause. Behind her, her husband appeared. He didn't speak, just crossed his arms and leaned on the doorframe, the kind of body language that tells you, this isn't your home anymore. My daughter didn't move. "Is there something you need?" she asked, still blocking the entrance. I stared at her. This woman I raised, whose first broken bone I wrapped in frozen peas and gauze. And then, I said it plainly, "This cabin is still under my name. You knew that. You knew it when you locked me out last night." Her smile faltered, not from fear, from calculation. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice rising just enough for the porch to hear. "You always say things like that when you're confused. Do you need to rest? Maybe we should call someone." Behind her, her husband let out a low, performative sigh, like he was dealing with a burden, not a mother-in-law. I took a step forward. "No," I said. "Don't you dare twist this. You knew what you did. I saw you. Last night. In my cabin." She didn't flinch. But someone did. Mrs. Ellery, the neighbour 2 doors down, was standing at the edge of her porch with a small bag of birdseed in her hand, frozen in mid-motion. She looked from me to my daughter, and then looked away, just like that. I knew. Whatever happened next, the story was already being rewritten, and I was being written out. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. There was no point shouting into a storm that had already frozen over. But I didn't leave either. Instead, I stepped forward, quiet and slow, just enough to close the distance between us. My daughter didn't move. Her jaw tightened, like she was bracing for something worse than noise. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old house key, held it between my thumb and forefinger like something fragile. Then I looked at her, not as a mother betrayed, but as a woman looking into a mirror that no longer reflected her. "You don't have to open the door," I said, my voice steady but low. "I already know what's behind it." She blinked, and for the first time, I saw it. Not anger, not control, but a flicker of shame. I took one step closer, then gently placed the key in her palm. She didn't close her fingers around it, just stared. "That key," I said, quieter now. "It doesn't open anything new. It only reminds you of who built the lock." Her husband shifted behind her. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on my daughter, the girl who once traced letters into the frost of this cabin's windows, who once whispered secrets to me on these same floorboards. I pulled off my right glove and held up my hand. "You see that?" I asked. She glanced at it. Rough, cracked from cold. I scraped those floorboards with these fingers, sanded every edge until they didn't give you splinters, nailed every panel in that back room while you did your homework on the porch swing. I took a breath, then added, softer, "When you sit by that fire tonight, remember, you're still being warmed by your mother's work." And with that, I turned. I walked down the steps, through the snow, past the birdseed frozen in Mrs. Ellery's hand. They didn't call after me, but silence can hold more weight than any slammed door. The snow had barely melted from my boots when I opened my laptop. My fingers ached, but they moved with purpose. I wasn't writing to my daughter. I was writing to the Homeowners Association, the one I helped found 20 years ago when this cabin was just one of 4 on the lake. My message was short, clear. I cited the property code, the original deed, the trustee clause my husband and I signed together back in 1997. I included photos, scanned copies of the floor plans, my name on the tax forms, the community improvement receipt for the fire pit I paid for with my own savings. It wasn't about kicking them out, not yet. It was about something far more important, reclaiming the truth, on paper, in record, and in the eyes of those who'd quietly looked away. I clicked send. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Emma?" It was Joan, the current president of the HOA. Her voice held the tone of someone caught between duty and discomfort. "I got your email," she said. "I wasn't aware your daughter was staying up there." "She didn't ask," I said, flat. "She assumed I wouldn't show up again." A pause. Then, "Well, that's complicated." "No, Joan," I said quietly. "It's not. Not if we treat it like any other property violation." Another pause. Then the sound of typing. "We'll review it formally," she said. There's a board meeting Thursday. You're welcome to attend. I planned to. After the call ended, I sat back. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was the last place with my name still printed in stone, not just memory, and now I'd placed it back in the public eye, back into a space where silence couldn't erase me. Later that afternoon, I saw the ripple begin. A message appeared in the neighbourhood Facebook group. Does anyone know what's going on with Lot 6? Heard the owner might be disputing something. I didn't reply. Not yet, but I watched, and I waited. Because sometimes the loudest statement isn't a shout, it's a document, and mine was already filed. It had been 3 hours since I emailed the HOA when my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Joan. It wasn't a number I recognised. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Emma speaking. A silence, and then, hey, it's Lila, my half-sister. The last time we spoke, it ended with a slammed phone and a letter that started with, as executor of the estate. I gripped the phone tighter. I know this is unexpected, she said, her voice gentler than I remembered. But I saw the post in the community group about the cabin. Of course she did. She still lived 2 towns over, close enough to hear rumours, far enough not to interfere, until now. I didn't post it, I said, I know, but I knew it had to be you. I didn't answer. Then she said softly, I thought you sold the place. So did everyone, apparently. A pause. I remember when Dad brought us there that first summer, she continued. We painted that terrible pine green on the kitchen cabinets and thought we were interior designers. I cracked a tired smile. I repainted them white the next year. I know. She chuckled. You always cleaned up after me. Another pause, this one longer. Why are you calling, Lila? I asked, not harsh, but not soft either. She inhaled. I guess I just didn't like the idea of someone else sitting in that house pretending the memories were theirs. That stopped me, because I hadn't expected her to care. Not after years of distance, not after we divided everything down to the silverware. I didn't call to fight, she added quickly, or to take sides. Then why? To say that if you need me, I remember where the spare key is, and I still have a shovel if the snow gets bad again. I didn't answer right away, but my throat caught on something I hadn't felt in days. Warmth, not heat from a fire, but the kind that melts years of quiet bitterness just enough to make you wonder if forgiveness had been sitting in the background all along. After Lila hung up, I stayed in the kitchen of the rental unit I'd checked into the night before. The kettle hissed on the stove, steam clouding the window above the sink. Outside, the wind pushed at the snowdrifts like it was trying to erase everything in its path. I sat down and let the silence wrap around me. There was something about Lila's voice, something that pulled at a corner of my memory I hadn't unfolded in years. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was the only place where my name had never been shortened, corrected, or ignored. Where I'd once carved Emma plus Dad into the bark of an old pine out back, and no one told me to grow up. I reached into my overnight bag and pulled out a small folder I hadn't opened in a decade. Inside were papers, deed copies, maintenance logs, and at the very bottom, an envelope, yellowed at the corners, addressed in my father's handwriting. I hadn't read it since the day after the funeral, but I opened it now. Emma, if you're reading this, it means the keys to the cabin are yours now. I know your sister and I had our differences, and I'm sorry you had to carry more than your share. This place was always yours, even before the paperwork caught up. I only hope you never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own story. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from truth, because somewhere along the way, I had. Not just at the cabin. In birthdays I wasn't invited to. Phone calls that never came. Photos I wasn't in. And every time I swallowed that silence, I helped build it. I let people forget who I was because I thought being quiet made me strong, but maybe all it did was make me invisible. I looked at the kettle, now whistling in protest, and turned it off. Maybe reclaiming the cabin wasn't just about proving ownership. Maybe it was about remembering that I existed before they started editing me out. The snow had softened overnight, but the air still carried the bite of unfinished business. I returned to the cabin just after 9, the envelope from my father tucked securely inside my coat. I didn't expect anyone to be outside, let alone waiting for me. But Lila was there. She stood at the edge of the driveway in a navy parka, gloved hands wrapped around a steaming thermos. For a second, I thought I imagined her. Then she waved. "You came," I said, more surprised than I meant to sound. She shrugged. "I remembered how much you hated walking up this hill alone." I couldn't help but smile briefly. "I thought you wanted to stay out of it." "I did," she said, stepping closer. "But then I remembered Dad gave both of us pieces of this place. Not just wood and nails, stories, and some of them, they still have your name on them." She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in wax paper. "I found this in the attic at Mom's old house. From that year you rebuilt the porch." I unwrapped it carefully. It was a photo, me, 15 years younger, kneeling beside Dad, hammer in hand, and scribbled on the back, "Emma, stronger than any beam we laid." My eyes stung, but I held it in. This wasn't the moment to cry. This was the moment to reclaim. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded, then looked toward the cabin. "They're inside." I figured. "You ready?" I looked down at the envelope in my hand, then back at the porch where my daughter now claimed ownership with a smile and a lie, more than I've ever been. We walked up together. This time I didn't knock. I opened the door. The key had always been mine. Inside, my daughter and her husband stood by the fireplace, startled. But I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the envelope on the table between us and said, "You forgot what this place remembers." My daughter didn't touch the envelope at first. She looked at me like I was bluffing, like this was another one of my sentimental power plays, as she once called them. But then Lila spoke. "It's from Dad," she said. "He wrote it before he passed, left a copy with his lawyer. I kept mine." That got their attention. My daughter reached for the letter, slower than usual. Her husband leaned over her shoulder as she unfolded it. Silence. I could hear the pop of the fireplace, the sound of Lila quietly zipping her coat behind me, the weight of a truth they didn't want to read, but couldn't unsee. She skimmed the top, then stopped halfway through. I watched her eyes shift, not with fear, with recognition. "Emma, this place is yours, legally, emotionally, completely. I never told the girls about the inheritance split because it wasn't theirs to carry. This cabin came from your mother's family. I only hope someday they understand why you needed a space that couldn't be taken from you." Her hands trembled slightly. Her husband spoke first. This isn't dated. It doesn't count if—" "It is dated," Lila cut in. 2 weeks before he passed, signed, witnessed, filed. He looked like he wanted to argue, but his words dried up before they reached the air. My daughter folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope like it might burn her fingers. She didn't look at me when she said it. "You could have just told me." My voice was calm. "I did, for years. You weren't listening." Lila stepped forward. "She has the original deed. The taxes are still in her name. HOA confirmed this morning." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, because this wasn't a game I wanted to win. But it was one I refused to lose. They didn't scream. They didn't protest. They packed, quietly, methodically. As if they'd known this day might come and had rehearsed the choreography, my daughter folded blankets. Her husband unplugged the phone chargers, emptied the fridge. They moved around me like I wasn't there. I stood in the living room, holding the same photo frame they'd once given me, one of us at the lake when she was 12, all sunburnt cheeks and tangled hair. She took it from my hands without looking at me. "We'll be out in 30, she said. Not a question, not a request, just a logistical update. "You're welcome to stay," I offered, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe a part of me still hoped she'd say something else, anything else. She didn't. Instead, she opened the hall closet and began pulling their coats off the hooks. Coats I had sewn extra loops into years ago so the grandkids could reach them. She paused when she saw the snow globe on the shelf. The one her father brought back from Colorado after their first family ski trip. She took it too. I didn't stop her. What was I going to do? Argue over glass and glitter? I watched as they loaded the car. A single bag, one plastic tote, and then something small. A canvas tote holding a stack of board games we used to play here. She turned to me one last time. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," she said. But her tone wasn't defensive. It was detached. "That's the problem," I replied. "You're doing it because you don't feel anything at all." She blinked, maybe hurt, maybe not, then turned and got in the car. Lila stayed behind with me. We watched the taillights disappear down the snowy road, the silence pressing in heavier than before. "They'll be back," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "They won't. Not to me." She didn't argue. We stepped back into the cabin. The walls felt wider, the space colder. I picked up the photo they'd left behind by mistake, a blurry shot of the kids playing in the creek. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just placed it face down on the mantel. For now, the silence after they left wasn't peaceful. It was structural, like a house just emptied of furniture, echoing in places I didn't know could echo. I sat for a while, not grieving, not gloating, just recalibrating. Then I stood up and started writing things down. First, I called the county office and requested a fresh title printout. Second, I emailed my lawyer, Martha, and scheduled a meeting to revise my will. Third, I walked to the back room, the one they had turned into a playroom, and removed every item that didn't belong to me. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. If I had to rebuild from silence, I wanted to make sure the foundation wouldn't shift again. I changed the alarm code, updated the locks, had the smart thermostat app moved to my phone instead of theirs. Then I pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind I used back in my teaching days when I needed to organise chaos into columns. I titled the first page, "What Stays, What Goes." Under Stays, I wrote, Dad's photo in the hallway, the pine bench by the dock, the white enamel kettle, the name on the deed. Under Goes, I wrote, their spare keys, the broken promise in my daughter's voice, that framed picture of our first winter here, because it wasn't ours, it was mine. Around mid-afternoon, Lila reappeared with 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder. She handed it to me. "It's the old HOA charter," she said, "back when you and Dad co-wrote the rules. They're still valid." I flipped through it. There it was, Article 3, Clause D. Legacy property under sole maintenance and tax responsibility is considered individually owned, regardless of informal use. Proof, again. But I wasn't collecting proof anymore. I was collecting peace. "This place is yours," she said. "Now what do you want to do with it?" I looked around. The cabin had dents, memories pressed into its beams, some beautiful, some hollow. "I want to make it mine again," I said. But this time, on my own terms. I was folding towels in the hallway closet when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice before she said my name. "Hi, Mom." It stopped me cold. Not because she said it, but because of how she said it, like she wasn't sure if she still could. "I'm not calling to fight," she added quickly. I've been thinking." I leaned against the doorframe, silent. "I know I messed up," she continued, "and I'm not asking you to forget that, but I wanted you to know it wasn't about the cabin." She took a breath. Then, "It was about not knowing how to be in a space that still smelled like you." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," her voice cracked slightly, "after Grandma died, and Dad travelled so much. This place was supposed to be my version of home, but it never was. It was yours. Every drawer had your handwriting, every cupboard smelled like your tea. I felt like a guest in my own story." I swallowed. She wasn't angry, she was exposed. "I didn't know how to make it mine without pushing you out," she admitted, "so I did it the only way I knew how." I didn't speak. She filled the silence. "I guess I grew up thinking motherhood was something that disappeared, like women left or faded. You didn't. You stayed, and maybe that scared me more than it should have." There it was, the softest cut. I wasn't too absent. I was too present, for someone who didn't know how to accept that kind of consistency. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, almost whispering, "but I thought maybe you should hear it out loud." I closed my eyes, let the silence stretch, not to punish, but to hold the weight of what she just gave me. Finally I said, "You don't have to ask for the cabin. You were born in it, but I do need you to stop pretending that means you earned it." A pause. "I can try," she said. Then she hung up. No goodbye, just space. But for once, it didn't feel like distance. It felt like the start of a different map. That night, after the call, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The wind had softened. The lake was still. I opened a fresh page in the leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years, the one my daughter gave me for my birthday when she was 16 with a note inside, "For all the stories you still have to tell." I hadn't written in it since the week after my husband's funeral. Until now, I picked up my pen and slowly copied her words. I felt like a guest in my own story. I stared at the sentence, then wrote below it, "So did I." There was something beautiful and tragic in that echo. 2 women, 1 house, years apart, both feeling like intruders in something they helped build. I didn't write anything else that night, but I folded that page inward, like pressing a flower you wanted to save, not show. The next morning, I tore out a blank sheet of paper, wrote the same quote in clean cursive, and placed it in an old frame I found in the hallway drawer. I hung it in the kitchen, right above the stove, where the smell of chamomile and burnt toast always lingered, not as a reminder of pain, but as a mark of change. Because even if we never said the words, "I'm sorry," she had spoken something real, and real things deserve to live somewhere permanent. Lila came by that afternoon with groceries and paused when she saw the frame. "She said that?" I nodded. "She meant it?" "I think." She finally did. Lila set the bag down. "You know what's strange?" she said. "Dad once said something almost exactly like that. After Mom left, he said, 'Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my own life from the guest room.'" I smiled faintly. Maybe it runs in the family. We shared a silence. Not awkward, just shared. Then Lila broke it. "You're not alone here, Em, even if they never come back." I looked around the kitchen. The framed sentence, the mug in my hand, the list of things to fix on the fridge. "I know," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. It came on a Saturday. A cream-coloured envelope. No return address, but the seal said enough. Dark blue ink, embossed with the letters, Bennett and Moore LLP. I knew that name. They weren't cheap. And they didn't send birthday cards. I opened it with steady hands. Inside, 3 pages, typed, labelled, Notice of Property Dispute and Request for Arbitration. It wasn't from my daughter, it was from her husband, claiming shared financial investment in renovations and long-term occupancy, claiming verbal agreements regarding joint use, claiming emotional hardship resulting from sudden ejection. Suddenly, it wasn't just my name on the deed they wanted to argue. It was my right to have peace. Lila found me at the kitchen table, the letter unfolded beside a half-empty cup of tea. She picked it up, read quickly, her eyes narrowed. This is low, even for him. I didn't say anything right away, because anger wasn't useful. Not here. Instead, I opened a drawer and pulled out a small file box. Inside, receipts, tax records, a letter from Dad's attorney dated 2 decades ago, photos, even a faded check, made out to the original contractor who'd built the extension in 2003. Do you think I kept all of this for sentiment? I asked. Lila shook her head. You kept it for this. I nodded. We made a list. I emailed Martha. Again. This time with attachments. I wasn't going to be bullied into silence, not by a man who once asked if the fireplace logs smelled too old. The confrontation wouldn't be in a courtroom. Not yet, but it had begun. And I would meet it the same way my father met winter storms, one shutter at a time, every latch in place, nothing left to chance. That night, I reread the letter once more. The last line made me pause. We hope to resolve this peacefully before public escalation is necessary. Public escalation. As if what they were doing wasn't already loud, I folded the paper, placed it in a red folder labelled Attempts. And in my journal, beneath my daughter's quote, I wrote a new line. Even silence can be a weapon, if wielded by someone who never learned to listen. Monday morning. I was sweeping pine needles off the porch when I heard a car door close. I turned, and there he was, alone, no kids, no wife, just him, standing in my driveway like he didn't remember how to use the path. He held a folder, red, not unlike the one I kept my own documentation in. I didn't speak first. Let the silence test him. He walked halfway up, stopped short of the porch step. This is for your lawyer, he said, holding the folder out like it weighed more than paper should. I took it. Didn't open it. He didn't leave right away. He looked past me, towards the side of the cabin, where the lilac bush used to grow before the frost took it. My daughter planted that, I said. He nodded. She told me. Still, he didn't move. His hand hovered near his coat pocket, then dropped. There's a box, he said, motioning toward the back of his SUV. Old photos. Yours, I think. I hesitated, then walked down with him. He opened the hatch. Inside were 2 boxes, one labelled Emma's, Do Not Toss. I looked at him. You were going to throw them out? He paused. Number she was. That pause meant something. He could have defended her instead. He let it sit there. We stood side by side. No words. Then he lifted the smaller box and handed it to me. I remembered you liked these, he said. I looked inside. Pressed between yellowed tissue paper were the embroidered placemats I'd made the year we first spent Christmas at the cabin. I thought they'd vanished. He could have kept them, thrown them, pretended not to know, but he didn't. And as I turned to thank him, he was already walking back toward the driver's side. No goodbye, no apology, but he paused at the door, not dramatic, not long, just enough for me to see the slightest turn of his head. Not toward me, toward the lake. Then he got in and drove off. Later, I placed the box in the hallway. Didn't open it fully. Just enough to peek. Old photographs. Me holding my daughter at age 3. My husband raking leaves. Lila painting the front steps. None of them looked like villains. They just looked young. Unfinished, I closed the box, wrote one word on the lid: unresolved. I stayed 2 more nights after the visit, not out of fear, not even to wait, just to listen. The cabin had its own language when it was truly empty, the creak in the floorboards, the hum of the heater when it kicked in, the way wind moved through the eaves like a sigh that never stopped. I made my coffee, sat by the window, and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for months. Do I still want this? Not legally, not sentimentally, just as a woman deciding what part of her past should come forward. The answer came the way old trees fall, quietly, but with no doubt. I didn't want to keep defending memories like a fortress. I wanted to build something new with what remained. That morning, I packed just one bag, left the old photos where they were, left the tea tins, left the framed quote on the kitchen wall. I walked through each room slowly, touching the door frames with my fingertips like a prayer said backwards. When I reached the porch, I looked back only once. The sun had hit the roof just right, golden streaks on the worn shingles. It didn't look like a place I was leaving, it looked like a place that had done its job. I locked the front door, not to shut anyone out, but to mark a chapter closed. I left the keys inside a metal box tucked behind the firewood bin, one labelled simply, "For when you're ready." I placed a fresh pine branch on the threshold, an old family symbol for peace after winter. Then I walked down the drive, got into Lila's car, and didn't look back again. That night, in her guest room, I wrote one final line in the journal. I didn't leave because I lost. I left because I chose to stop fighting ghosts. And beneath it, smaller, and that is the bravest thing I've ever done. 3 days after I left, I got a text from my old neighbour, Marlene. "Someone's been at the cabin," it said. "Not sure who, but thought you'd want to see." Attached was a photo, the front porch, afternoon light casting long lines across the steps, and sitting just beneath the doorframe, where I'd left the pine branch, was something new. A folded quilt, red and cream patchwork, the one I thought had gone missing years ago. I stared at the image, zoomed in, confirmed the corner stitching, ER 1985, my initials, hand sewn when I was still figuring out who I was as a wife, as a mother. That quilt had covered cribs, picnic tables, sick kids on the couch, and now it was back. No note, no name, just placed, gently. I didn't ask Marlene to check inside, didn't want her to. Some doors, once shut, need to stay shut until the person holding the handle is ready to enter for the right reasons. But the message was clear enough. Someone had come, not to take, but to return. I made myself tea, sat at Lila's window, which overlooked a quiet stretch of pine and sky. The wind danced through the trees with the same rhythm as back at the cabin. And I let myself wonder, not obsess, about who brought the quilt. My daughter? Lila said she hadn't heard from her. The kids? Too young. Him? Maybe. Or maybe it was just memory itself, finding its way home in the only language it knew, fabric and thread. I didn't tell anyone else, didn't forward the photo, didn't post it, didn't call. Instead, I printed it. Taped it to the inside of my journal, right next to the page that said, "I didn't leave because I lost. I left because I chose to stop fighting ghosts." And underneath that, in small script, I added, "Sometimes they return without a sound." That night, I left the porch light on. Not at the cabin, here, where I was now. Because even if no one knocked, it felt like someone was trying to find their way back. And this time, I wasn't waiting, but I was open. Sunday dinner at Lila's was always casual. Roast chicken, green beans, apple pie if she had time. The kids wore pajamas by dessert. Nobody dressed up, and nobody talked politics. This time, I brought the quilt, folded over my arm, like a guest returning with something borrowed. Lila didn't ask. She just smiled and placed it on the couch. Halfway through dinner, her youngest, my granddaughter, Ellie, asked if we could do ghost stories after pie. No scary ones, Lila said. Ellie looked at me. Grandma's are never scary. Hers are soft ghosts. We all laughed. But inside, I stilled, because there was something about that phrase, soft ghosts. Later, after dessert, Ellie sat on the floor with a flashlight under her chin. She looked up, grinning. Okay, here's mine, she said. It's not really scary. We nodded. She cleared her throat and whispered, sometimes people fight ghosts. But the bravest thing is to stop. I didn't breathe for a moment. Lila turned slowly toward me, a small crease between her brows. Ellie continued, serious now. I heard Grandma say that once. I think it means sometimes you let the sad stuff go, even if it wants to stay. She shrugged. Anyway, that's my story. She passed the flashlight, but I wasn't listening anymore, because that sentence, my sentence, had come back in a new voice, through a child who didn't know she'd just broken something open inside me. Later, while Ellie got ready for bed, I sat on the couch with the quilt draped over my knees. Lila handed me a cup of tea. She really remembered that. I nodded. It wasn't meant for her, but she heard it anyway. We sat in silence. Then Lila added, maybe that's how legacies actually work, not through the things we try to leave, but the things they overhear. I looked at the framed photo above her mantel. All of us, years ago, on the cabin porch, smiling with mouths full of watermelon, no idea what storms were coming, and yet, here we still were, softer, not broken, maybe even better. That night, before bed, I wrote in my journal, words echo longer than anger, especially when whispered in the dark. And I taped a new photo below it, Ellie on the floor with the flashlight, eyes wide with her own kind of knowing. The next morning, I packed a small canvas bag, no clothes, no groceries, just a letter, a photograph, and an old brass key. Lila didn't ask where I was going, but when she saw me open the drawer and pull out the quilt, she just said, "Tell the house I said hello." The drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for music. When I reached the cabin, the snow had melted just enough to reveal last fall's leaves, pressed flat like forgotten pages. I didn't unlock the door. I slid the envelope under it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. My handwriting, nothing dramatic. You don't have to fight ghosts here. You just have to remember who planted the lilacs. I placed the photograph behind it. Ellie, flashlight in hand, face lit with wonder. And on the back, I wrote one word, next. Taped to the outside of the envelope was the brass key, the one to the front gate, the original one. Not because I wanted anyone to take over, but because I knew. Eventually, someone would return. Maybe not soon, maybe not even Ellie, but one day someone would need a place where silence wasn't heavy, just whole. And they'd find the key, and the words, and maybe they'd understand that this wasn't about property. It was about presence. Before I left, I sat for a moment on the front step, closed my eyes. The wind rustled the trees in that same gentle rhythm. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, then went silent. I whispered, almost like a blessing, "You held us. Now hold them." Then I stood, brushed off the back of my coat, and walked back to the car. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because sadness wasn't the ending. It was just another layer in the wood grain of the life we built here. That night, back at Lila's, I didn't write in my journal. I just turned to the final page, pressed the spine flat, and wrote, "Legacy isn't what we leave. It's what we allow to begin again. Then I closed the book, set it on the windowsill, and turned off the light. They never called. No message, no knock on the door, no reply to the letter I left behind. And yet, I didn't feel forgotten. Some silences carry answers, not the kind you frame or quote, the kind that live in the way your shoulders drop when you know the fight is no longer yours to hold. Weeks passed. Spring began to whisper its way through the branches. The daffodils near Lila's porch pushed through with quiet insistence. Birdsong returned to the mornings. And one afternoon, Ellie brought home a school project, a cardboard memory house. She placed it gently on the coffee table. "This is for you," she said. It had a paper front door that opened. Inside was a drawing, stick figures in a cabin, a fireplace, and a line of trees. But in the centre was something that stopped me. A tiny golden key glued to the roof. I looked up at her. She shrugged. I don't know why. I just felt like the house needed it. I didn't tell her anything. I just reached out and pressed my finger gently to that little key and whispered, "Me too." That night, I stepped outside alone. The wind moved through the trees like an old friend returning. I didn't speak to the sky, didn't ask for signs. Instead, I closed my eyes and simply listened. To the branches, to the stillness, to the soft beat of peace, finally unclenched. In my journal, on the very last page, I wrote, "They don't need to return it. They only need to remember it was once given." And below that, forgiveness doesn't always wear a name. Sometimes it's just not locking the door again. I placed the journal in the drawer beside my bed, turned off the lamp, and as the room faded into darkness, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to. If you're listening, and you've ever been locked out of someone else's memory, someone else's home, someone else's love, I hope this finds you, because you don't have to fight your way back in. Sometimes all you need is to leave the key where someone can find it, even if they never do.